5 years after Chop in Seattle, teen shooting death is without answers. Who did it? Don't really know. Is there lots of footage of it online? Yes, there is. Why is nobody willing to say, that guy shot them? Well, because then you'd have to say, at a Black Lives Matter event, a black life was ended. 2 of them were ended by the people running the Black Lives Matter deal. Doesn't look good. The optics are not good. Let's get into it. Here we go. So yeah, essentially what you have is you have an event that was supposed to be the Summer of Love that literally went wildly, wildly sideways. Summer of Love became an event in which 2 black kids were murdered in an area where police activity, this is a no cop zone. No cops, meaning any support that is needed for policemen, ambulances, medical technicians, you got none of that either. Because if you're not allowing the cops in, there are rules which state, hey, if you got a shooting, need the cops to go in, secure the area, then you can bring the ambulance in. This happened twice. This is what happened. And the city officials, Jenny Durkan, who was our mayor at the time, she said, it's going to be the greatest Summer of Love ever. That didn't really work out all that well, did it? Specifically for 2 black kids. They're somebody's kids. Horrific. So Antonio never came back. We're going to skip through in the story here. Antonio is a 16-year-old kid. A couple of days before Chop was absolutely just overrun with cops, which clearly they could have done much, much earlier. Trump wanted to send in the troops. No, I said no. I think you can square this thing away internally. And, being one of the guys that was live streaming literally on the front line as the police came through Cal Anderson Park, helicopters overhead, quite exciting. But the bottom line was you got 2 kids were murdered at an event that was supposed to celebrate Black lives. Horrific. Now, the first kid that was shot, this was Horace Lorenzo Anderson Jr. His murderer, Marcel Long, he got 14 years. So he admitted guilty plea. He got 14 years. The dad in that case got $500,000 to settle wrongful death lawsuit. And so that case is kind of squared away, right? As much as it's going to be squared away. I know the mom is still looking for, she had about at least 1 or 2 lawsuits, I believe, and she's still looking for justice, but I don't know what there's left because City of Seattle is not taking any responsibility because if they do, it's not a good look, is it? Hey, why'd you put that Chop thing together? Why did you have the East Precinct give up their police station? You don't do that, but that's what we're doing during fentanyl Floyd era, right? Minneapolis, same exact thing. But Antonio never came back. He was killed a week after he left, shot in the Chop zone while in a stolen Jeep. 2 days after his death, then Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan ordered Chop shut down. So I was over there a lot during this time period because I knew things were winding down. And so I ran over after this kid got murdered. I ran over just to see what it looked like. And at that point in time, you had the Seattle East Precinct, and you had all the tents from Black Lives Matter and Antifa were all positioned right around the police station because the police had basically backed them up into a corner and pushed them to this one area. So this kid came driving around with his white Jeep, and some were saying that he was firing a gun out the window. He had a 14-year-old passenger who sustained brain damage from the shooting. But there's footage out there on the interweb where you can hear probably 30 shots go off. Boom, 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 boom. I mean, semi-automatic gunfire, right? They killed him. They murdered him. Black Lives Matter and Antifa murdered that kid. Because who else do you have in the middle of the night when you got an incoming car out in front of the police station, a bunch of tents hunkered down, a bunch of audio? Somebody really wanted to figure this out. They could pin it on that individual. But you've got how many different guns were shooting there? We don't even know. We don't know. I mean, the whole thing was just so tainted. But I went to look at where the Jeep was, and I saw the memorial, and it was the next day, and it's like, geez, this is an absolute cluster. You know what? Governmental cluster. You allowed a no cop zone to be created and 2 black kids get murdered. I mean, make this make sense. Absolutely mentally disabled decision making by Seattle elected officials. This could be the greatest thing ever. Let's support Fentanyl Floyd. Now, let's not. In its earliest days, CHOP's cop-free blocks around the abandoned East Precinct felt like a respite from the nightly clashes with police, tear gas, and blast balls that had enveloped Capitol Hill for more than a week. Now, why had that happened? Because you had a bunch of lunatics running around with guns, and they wanted their own area. And so when they got their own area, in spite of their theory, which is, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter. We don't want borders. We want to eliminate the judicial system. We want to go down all these, defund the police, all that absolute craziness. But what does Black Lives Matter and Antifa do the minute they get an area of town? Put up barricades. They put up barriers. They put up sentinels. They put up guards, guys with guns. Oh yeah, is there anybody here that has a background in security? That's one of the more famous clips. And it's like they're looking for a white cop type dude because they need some help in there because they realize that they're wildly outmanned as far as taking care of a population of a few hundred people that are just hunkered down. It's the greatest summer of love ever. But then the zone took a darker turn, attracting guns, drugs, people with mental health issues, and people with nowhere else to go. This is NPR, National Propaganda Radio, and KUOW. That's our liberal left wing. They're going to try and spin this to, they had nowhere else to go. No, they build it and they will come. And that is what happened. You opened up an area for just some absolute insanity to happen. Like, how about we had this is only a garden for Black and Indigenous people. What about that? Absolute racism. Absolute racism. I mean, just to the core. And then a couple of kids get murdered? National news organizations and political influencers flocked to the scene because it was an absolute shit show. And it ended up like the absolute shit show that it was. Right-wing agitators threatened to descend on it. Trump said he was going to send in the National Guard. Maybe he should have. Being boots on the ground over there, and I didn't really understand what I was looking at, trying to figure out. It took me a week or so to figure out who all the players were and what was going on. And now we understand that a lot of those agitators, they're paid agitators. They're paid by George Soros. They're paid by, all these non-governmental organizations that get billions and billions and billions of dollars. That's why it was such a concerted effort. And that's a lot of what Elon Musk with Doge is basically cutting off funding for. So they're pissed because they're no longer going to have funding for the kind of ridiculous stuff that you saw at CHOP. CHOP became, fairly or not, a symbol of liberal cities' perceived lawlessness. Well, when it's a Black Lives Matter event and 2 black kids get murdered, what does that say? How? Make that make sense to me. Make that make sense. You can't. Because it's just, that's how those things go. 2 days after CHOP's creation, President Donald Trump, after watching Seattle protest coverage, called the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and told him to act fast and hard because the city was going to be taken over. Last fall, CHOP was still on his mind. He brought it up in both presidential debates because it's an example of if you let Democratic leadership go the direction they want to go, people get murdered. That's not good. And that's why you don't have a killer named here, because they don't want to, because they'd have to identify, wow, that's a member of Black Lives Matter or Antifa. Don't really know who. Yeah, they're interchangeable, right? That's who was opting this operation. So then you'd have to say, killed a black dude. But in Seattle, Chop's scars have mostly vanished from public view. There have been no charges filed in Antonio's death, no answers as to who killed him. Police department and city attorney's office have declined to answer questions about the case. Yeah, we're just not really going to investigate here because the answers are, you don't really want to know because the optics are so bad, specifically for the city of Seattle. There's some real liability here. There is liability. That's why nothing's going on. 2023, Antonio Mays Sr., the dad, frustrated by the city's silence, filed a wrongful death lawsuit alleging the city's negligence created the conditions that led to his son's killing. Agreed. They did. They did. This is somebody's son. Both kids, somebody's son. City has argued in court filings that it doesn't bear legal responsibility for Antonio's death because he was driving a stolen Jeep and shooting a gun before he was killed. We don't really know. I mean, there's footage out there, but it's hard to say. Was he the individual driving the Jeep? I think he was. His passenger was 14. I think they were driving around shooting guns, but there's a whole bunch of conflicting information. I mean, imagine that. Conflicting information at CHOP, right? And that he eventually, city attorneys have filed in court a particularly redacted police report about the theft of the vehicle and a live streamer's video in which the live streamer can be heard saying gunshots were coming from the Jeep. And it was my understanding this stolen vehicle was circling CHOP and taking shots, firing at people. So there was some kind of beef going on, yet neither confirmed the allegations that Antonio was driving or shooting. So we don't really know, but I think we don't really know on purpose. Now, Mays and his attorney are making another push to get answers from city leaders they believe have enabled CHOP's descent into violence. In a letter to the U.S. House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform sent last week, Mays' attorney urged Congress to probe the creation of CHOP and the status of the police homicide investigation. Unfortunately, never happened. That'll never happen. It's one of those things where, super sad, 2 black kids got murdered by those who allegedly were representing Black Lives Matter. I mean, the irony there to me is just, it's insane. What did you think would happen when you allow a bunch of radical nut jobs from the far left to take over an area in a major city in North America? What did you think would happen? And when exactly what happened that Trump was afraid of, leadership had to say, okay, boys, clear it out. And they literally, like 2 days before they cleared it out, they did kind of a dummy run. They sent a bunch of trucks in to take the barricades out of CHOP. They'd set up these barricades, big concrete barricades at the intersections, and they sent in a truck to remove those. I live streamed that. That was basically just a testing of the water to see how many individuals there were that they're going to be up against when they did the final clear out. And when they did the final clear out, it was after this kid had been murdered. And so even more people had left. There was down to just probably a couple of dozen people that were holdouts in front of the East Precinct of the Seattle Police Station, hunkered down in their tents and all their crap that they'd had strewn out throughout the area. The rest of the area, they basically had to give up because they didn't have the manpower to cover it anymore. Antonio's death represents a challenge to Seattle's identity as a bastion of progressive values. No, it's not a challenge. It's a reflection of what happens when a bunch of far-left nut jobs get together and somebody makes the terrible decision to give them a bunch of power and authority that you normally have covered by, I don't know, the police. And we defunded the police after this. Genius. Absolute geniusness, Seattle. You guys are so bright, so bright. A black teenager was killed at a protest against police killings of black people. But this should have never happened. A black teenager was killed at a protest against police killings of black people. How'd that work out? Not great. These parents, they lost a kid. Horrific. Horrific. Never had to happen. Now, the first one happened with, Marcel Long being the killer. They were gambling, and they'd gambled until late at night. And one kid said to the other one, "I think you're cheating," or whatever, and shot him. Because if you're in an area and there's no police around, and you know that you can get out of that area unscathed because cops ain't coming, is there some liability for the city? Absolutely. $500,000 in wrongful death lawsuit, right? And according to videos taken during and after the fatal shooting, he may have been killed by armed protesters who appointed themselves as security in the absence of police. 100% correct. That's who killed Antonio Mays Jr. Black Lives Matter / Antifa. We don't really know. We're not specific. We don't really know. But those individuals were kind of one and the same. And we found out that they're funded by George Soros and a bunch of other NGOs. That's why they're organized. That's why they're out doing pro-Palestine rallies. All they do is switch out the chants, right? In this case, it was take to the streets, F the police, no justice, no peace. And then they move it on to free, free, free Palestine. You know what I mean? Catchy chants. If it meant that I'd have my son back, I wouldn't teach my son Black history, Mays Sr. said through tears from his home in Orange County, California, because I want to have him back right now. This is somebody's son. Somebody is missing a son because of misguided policy, misguided decisions that have basically been covered up in Seattle because the optics are horrific. It looks terrible. How'd that chop thing go? Good Lord. We don't talk about John. No, let's not get into it. Seattle police say the case remains active and have denied public records requests seeking further information. This is one of those cases where I'm always like, I want to know. Why haven't they moved forward? Because the implications are literally horrific. Who killed him? Oh, good Lord. Are you kidding me? No way. That doesn't look good. That's terrible. The shooting deaths last year of 6 teenage boys in Seattle also remain unsolved. Several of those killings also had multiple witnesses present. What do you say, right? When nobody wants to come forward, that's kind of when you know. All right. Yeah, it's because this doesn't look good. Doesn't look good. Optics, not good. Mays says that he hasn't heard anything from the police since 2020. I couldn't get a hold of anybody, he said. Everything went silent because it was terrible. And there's police chief Carmen Bass. She quit when the city of Seattle said, yeah, we're going to defund you by a scooch. And she said, no, you're not, because I quit. And she did. She just booked it out of there. Seattle police and the city's attorney office have declined to answer reporters' questions about the events of June 29th. The Jeep and the police investigation of Antonio's death, citing ongoing litigation in an active police case. Yeah, it's an active police case that's not so active. And it's not active on purpose because nobody wants the answers, because the answers would basically be the poster child for how not to handle one of these uprisings in your city. Yeah, just not a good idea, not a good call. So this is literally a case study in how not to have a bunch of nut jobs running around your community. Remember CHOP? Oh, yeah. Yeah. So 5 years later, Mays and his attorneys have written to Congress because they want accountability from Seattle's former mayor. All right, emphasis on former mayor. Mayor's not there. No. Police chief ain't there. Nah, she's working for Microsoft and corporate security or something. And others who say they have simply moved on. They all have. They've all moved on. I'm hoping that they bring the previous administration back to answer for their wrongdoing. Never happened, unfortunately. I would love to see it because I'd love to get answers. I would love for this dad who's lost his child to have some answers. Who killed your kid? Who killed your kid? I think you have a right to know, right? And to provide answers as to who the de facto police in that zone. Well, it was Black Lives Matter were the de facto police, right? That's what this was. It was a Black Lives Matter event. Just set it right on the street, right? In an email statement to the Seattle Times last week, former Mayor Durkan called Antonio's death a tragedy and described it as part of an enduring cycle of violence that has traumatized families and taken too many young people like Antonio. This is not an ongoing cycle of violence where Black Lives Matter kills people. That's basically a one-off event. This is not an ongoing deal where you have a bunch of wannabe security that's literally killing black kids. Yeah, that's what they did. That's what happened. Poof. Durkan said that as mayor, she addressed gun violence and its disproportionate impact on black boys and men by working with public officials and community members to drive down murders in 2021. After a black 16-year-old kid got gunned down at a Black Lives Matter event. Yeah. Right? Spokesperson for current Mayor Seattle Bruce Mayer wrote in a separate emailed statement that while Antonio's death occurred before Harold took office, not my fault. We express our sympathies to the family for the tragic loss of their son. Bottom line is, the kid ain't coming back, right? It's the harsh reality, and that is so terrible. He's not coming back, and there's no answers, and there's no justice, and we don't know who killed this poor young man. So, some people are going to say, well, he made decisions that weren't the greatest and it ended his life. Yeah, but would he have made those decisions knowing that he's in an area? At 16, you don't have the ability to make like really good quality life decisions. So he's driving around. He may or may not have been involved in the robbery of this vehicle. He's driving around. He's got a gun. I mean, allegedly, you hear from multiple sources, and he's making some pretty crappy decisions. But those decisions wouldn't necessarily have been if city officials hadn't given up a multi-block area of Seattle, period. He wouldn't have been there. He wouldn't have been killed. He wouldn't have been killed by Black Lives Matter / Antifa. So, I mean, just the whole thing is just an absolute craziness. Let's skip down to... But by the early morning hours of June 29th, CHOP had changed. Guns and drugs were out in the open. The space had transformed into something much more volatile. I remember I covered a bunch of footage of the Black and Indigenous people only garden area. I was just taking footage of it. And I remember there was a skirmish. There was something going on. And this is in Cal Anderson Park. This is in the area where the football field is, or soccer field, or whatever, multi-purpose field. So to the south and east is the police station. All of a sudden, a bunch of people popped up out of their tents and went running. They went running, call it a couple of blocks. There was some kind of skirmish. And so their police force is literally jumping out of tents because they're staying in tents on Cal Anderson Field with AR-15s, with whatever kind of assault rifles they had. I mean, I literally watched that happen and thinking, man, I'm just here to shoot some footage of the garden. They dumped a bunch of plants on top of cardboard and put some dirt and called it a garden. They were going to feed, the 10,000 or whatever. Didn't really happen. Here is a picture of the Jeep Grand Cherokee. You can see the windows are just all blown out. And what happened is he rammed into one of the barricades, the concrete barricades, or he ran into a porta potty, and the porta potties are right here. And that he kind of did that like twice, and then he was just loaded up with bullets. Right? He was literally loaded up with bullets. Here's the conversation you can hear on tape. You're not dead, huh? There were dozens, if not hundreds of people in the CHOP area around 3 a.m. on June 29th. Some were sleeping in tents, some were milling around, some were patrolling, acting as security for protesters scared by reports of possible right-wing violence. That's what all the left-wingers did to basically get, their folks incited into, this could be a right-wing agitator. They're coming for us. It's a black 16-year-old kid, and you killed him instead. So how'd that work out? At 2:54 a.m., gunshots rang out, about a dozen within 30 seconds. They roused Marcus Kulik in his fourth-floor Capitol Hill apartment overlooking the protest zone. A video game artist, he'd been largely shut inside in the early days of the pandemic and had started broadcasting live footage of the protest area using a camera perched at his window. When he heard the gunshots, he grabbed a longer lens to see what was going on. And here's what you can hear. Everybody down, everybody down. Eyes up, eyes up, eyes up. Anyone with weapons, I want them behind this barrier. That is literally, so they are talking from, here's where the Jeep crashed, and here is, right at the corner there is, we'll get my Mr. Yellow out. Right at the corner there were barricades with the out in front of the police department. So you're looking at, not a very long shot. I mean, they were all hunkered down. Anyone with weapons, I want them behind this barrier. Multiple vehicles, stolen white Jeep. 3 minutes later, tires screeched and a white Jeep Cherokee traveling up East Pike Street turned left on 12th Avenue, headed towards the encampment of protesters outside Seattle Police abandoned East Precinct. A scream, then a gunshot, then two more. People ducked behind barricades and fled. The Jeep hit either a concrete barrier or a portable toilet on the edge of the protest area. 6 more gunshots. The Jeep backed up briefly, then drove forward again, hit the barrier and the toilet. 10 more gunshots. Someone appeared to approach the Jeep. "Oh, you're not dead, huh?" someone said. "Yo, you want to get pistol whipped?" Saying to the kid bleeding out and his buddy bleeding out as well. Kulik said police have never contacted him or asked about his video. Both Antonio and the 14-year-old were pulled from the Jeep and bandaged by volunteer medics. They were then taken from the scene in private cars because Seattle police and paramedics refused to enter the zone. The law is if you've got a shooting, you got to have police in there to clear it. They're the ones with the experience. That is by the books. That is to keep everybody safe. When you've got a no-cop zone, like the genius officials authorized, this is what happens. The medical personnel that could have put him back together probably kept him alive. They weren't allowed to go into this area because it was a no-cop zone. Nice going, guys. This kid died because of your inability to think through the implications of, it's going to be the summer of love. The car with the 14-year-old drove straight to Harborview Medical Center, while the car with Antonio attempted to meet Seattle Fire Department medics at a rendezvous point a few blocks away. That was the taco restaurant. Taco Bueno, I think it was. This resulted in a 24-minute delay in getting Antonio professional help. I've watched the video on that. People are screaming at the ambulance driver. You're in the middle of a war zone. You're not going to just say, I'll just drive my ambulance wherever you tell me with a bunch of lunatics running around. Right? That's what it was. It was complete chaos. The driver pursued the paramedics and eventually met them in a parking lot, but by that time, Antonio had died. He bled out because of city officials' negligence in allowing a bunch of far-left lunatics to take over a multi-block area in Seattle. And then when things go sideways, what do? Don't talk about it. Just mum's the word. Oh, not good optics. Not good optics. That was horrific, wasn't it? Good Lord. Yeah. I mean, just zero accountability, zero responsibility. Everybody knows what the deal is. Everybody, I mean, within those folks, they know. I mean, it wouldn't take much pressure to find out who actually, was on board with shooting the major one gun. Because it was multiple shooters and multiple, streams of gunfire, that took place. So there's a whole bunch of people that know exactly who the killer is. I don't think we've got anything more here. Yeah. And then you can hear him on the video saying, hell yeah, no evidence, pick that shit up. Did anyone witness? No, and nobody is going to witness anything, Dorless responds. Just mum's the word. Just cover it up. And that's why you've got all these other shootings that, happen in the same way. And who comes forward? Nobody. Nobody comes forward because, mum's the word. Optics on this, terrible. We don't want everybody to get indicted. So, no harm, no foul. And that is literally where we sit with this one. The city's attorney office declined to comment on its defense. Yeah, that's why they're seeking a separate inquiry into Congress. My goal here is to find out, if not who killed his son, let's have some direction of what's going on. It's been almost 5 years. And from that standpoint, you're never going to find out. That's not going to happen. This is water under the bridge, unfortunately. This is the direct result of terrible leadership decisions and some real accountability. But because it's been so long and nobody really wanted to find out who the real killer was, because in revealing that, it exposes so many people to so many questions of, how did that happen? How did you let that happen? And Trump knows it. He knows it. He knows exactly what the implications are. Black Lives Matter killed one of its own. That's the bottom line. If you see it differently, let me know in the comments. You tell me who did this. You tell me who's saying these words on the street as they're lighting some kid up, bringing a stolen vehicle in. You tell me who did that. Yeah, it wasn't concerned citizens in their apartments. I'll tell you that much. All right. That's it for me on this one. Thanks so much for being here. I'll catch up with you in the next one. Bye for now.